Today, many people, as I saw them crying, they started asking various questions. One of the questions was, is Michael in heaven? Is he in heaven with James Brown? And is he in heaven with Tupac? Is he in heaven with Farrah Fawcett? Well, first of all, Michael Jackson grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, and I believe that there are some very fine, loving people in every denomination. However, one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and I agree with this particular belief, is what happens when a person dies. According to the Bible, when a person dies, the Bible says clearly in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, that's Ecclesiastes chapter 9, beginning with verse 5, that when a person dies, that their memory ceases, that they know or they are no more aware or conscious of their love, their hate, their envy. And that's Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5 and 6 for those who would really like to study this out. Also, in Job chapter 7, verse 9 and 10, it's very clear. It says when a person dies that they don't return home. It says their breath leaves them and they go to the grave and they await the resurrection of Christ. When you look at the whole makeup of man and you say, well, what is man made of? Well, in Genesis chapter 2, the Bible says that God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So in other words, it took a body or the dust plus breath for it to be a living soul. When a man dies, that spirit, that life that God gives comes out, and the shell that is there, it is in a sleep state. One of the most evident facts in the Bible, and again, for those who don't believe in the Bible, I don't have a context in which to teach you. But those who profess to be Christians, all are very familiar with the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. Lazarus is dead. And Jesus uses the word, or he causes the word sleep to be equal with dead. And he goes to the tomb and he says, roll away the stone. And they said, well, he's been dead for 4 days. He stinks now. There's no talk about him going immediately to heaven. There's no talk about him being conscious of anything going on. There's no talk about him even being able to communicate with Jesus anymore. And the reason why, because it agrees with it agrees with Ecclesiastes 9:5. If you don't have a memory, if your memory perishes, if you don't have thoughts, if your thoughts perish, how can you communicate with anybody? How could you find your way back home? But in Lazarus' situation, Jesus says, roll back the stone. They say he's been dead now for 4 days. He stinks. His body's decomposing. And Jesus weeps. And a lot of people say, well, wow, look at Jesus. He's weeping because of the death of Lazarus. But no, he was not weeping for the death of Lazarus. And if you read in chapter 11 of John, it says clearly he was weeping because of the unbelief and the lack of faith of the people around. He had been with them so long, and they really didn't realize that he truly was the Son of God. And he exclaimed almost in an agitated way, I am the resurrection in that chapter. But when he came to the tomb of Lazarus and he said, roll away the stone, and they rolled away the stone, he clearly said, Lazarus, come forth. If Lazarus had gone directly to heaven, he could have just looked up and said, Lazarus, come down. But Lazarus was in a state of sleep, and Michael's in a state of sleep. He's not worried about bills. He's not worried about concerts. He's not worried about fans. He's not worried about his children. He's in a state of rest. He's in a state of peace, awaiting the resurrection of Christ. Which brings the next question. Will Michael Jackson go to heaven? Will he be saved? Now, one of the things that we have to understand, again, according to the Bible says that we must all meet or come before or appear. It uses the word appear. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give an account for what the deeds that have been done in the body. Everyone will have to go before the judgment. Now, the Bible also says that God records everything that we do, and that there's a record in heaven of everything that we do. But the precious promise in the Bible that many people don't understand is that God does not judge us the way we would judge each other. Let me read a very interesting text that some people may not even be familiar of in the book of Psalm, in the book of Psalm in the 87th division. In the 87th division of Psalm, this is one of the most beautiful passages that I've ever read concerning the judgment. It says very clearly in Psalm 87, the 87th division of Psalm, beginning with verse 4, he says, I will make mention of Rahab and Babylon to them that know me. Behold, Philistia and Tyre, and Ethiopia. And now listen to this next statement. This man was born there, and of Zion it shall be said, this and that man was born in her. And the highest himself shall establish her. The Lord shall count when he writeth up the people that this man was born there. In other words, what this is saying is that God does not only look at our behavior, he does not only look at our activities in life, but he considers where we were born. He considers how we were raised. He considers the various traumatizing experiences that we may have gone through in life. And God weighs that against the privileges that one has had. And this is why he says that he will say to Rahab one thing, but to Zion another. In other words, Rahab would represent those who have never really had a clear understanding of the things of God or biblical principles of God, or maybe they weren't raised in the best of atmospheres. I remember Richard Pryor and his story of being raised in a brothel. And when I met Richard Pryor and spoke to him and prayed with him one day, it was a very moving experience to see how sincere of a man he was and how receptive he was to Christ. But if you look at what some of his albums or some of his movies or some of his presentations represented, you would automatically say, well, this man was not a godly man. God reads the heart. God considers if you raised in a brothel. God considers if you were treated in an ill manner by a parent. God looks at these things and he considers not only these things, but then Zion, he says, wait a minute, you were born in an atmosphere that was much more pleasurable. You had greater advantages, but what did you do with them? And so when it comes to the judgment of Michael, the safest thing to do is to believe it with God, because God is a fair person and God is a loving person, and everything that he does in the end will bring an atmosphere where all people will not only be satisfied, but it will be peace and happiness.